Good morning. We're going to be looking at Proverbs and Corinthians today. One thing that I wanted to point out today with the Proverbs is an interesting memorization technique. Where oftentimes you have the first word of the sentence is the same word as the next word. The last word of the sentence is the first word of the next sentence. It's a very common process for the Proverbs to help memorize. Where, if this makes any sense, let me kind of explain what I mean. Is oftentimes in the Proverbs you'll have, this kind of A-B action, and then the next verse. And what you'll find is that very often, like for example, in our Proverbs today, we're starting off on verse 5. He who gathers in summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who brings shame. So this would be, sometimes Proverbs are where the second part will nuance the first part, right? So if I can find one here, these are all buts here. Let's see. So I can find one that, yeah, here, like verse 18 of chapter 10. The one who conceals hatred has lying lips, and whoever utters slander is a fool. So the second is related to the first, the B is related to the A, and the B narrows the focus. So you almost have kind of a decrescendo kind of effect, if that makes any sense, where you're going from larger to smaller, less nuanced to more nuanced, or perhaps they just relate to each other semantically. They're dealing with the same kind of ideas. One is one specific area, and then the other one is another. So again, in verse 18, the one who conceals hatred has lying lips, and whoever utters slander is a fool. They're similar in structure. It's not a hendiasis. Sometimes, this is even more interesting, sometimes like with an A and a B, you'll have, see if I can make this make sense, where a hendiasis is where it kind of works inside out. So you have the concept here would mirror the concept at the end. So they would put they put the noun here and the noun here and then the verb and verb or whatever. But it makes the verse almost like a puzzle that kind of works its way inside and then back out again, right? So sometimes that happens. Our one here on 18, our example, is basically you have the star in the same place, right? So you have the one who conceals hatred. So in other words, someone who hates someone but to keep it quiet has lying lips, and whoever utters slander is a fool. So in other words, the two parts describe a type of person, right? Now the first person, he has hate, but he doesn't say anything. The second person, he takes that even further. So this would be this idea here, right? Where it's not just that he has hate and says nothing, but no, slander is the active sense of this. You're not sitting back and being passive and hating someone and saying nothing. No, now you're actually putting things out there in the ether to destroy someone's reputation. as Luther would talk about, that's kind of the primary reputation is a possession, and then it can be destroyed if someone allows it to be destroyed, right? Or someone actively tries to destroy it. Right? So that would be one of these where you've got A and B for lack of a better word, complementing each other, and they're doing the same thing. Whereas almost all of the proverbs that we're going to be dealing with today and for a while in chapter 10 are contradictory ones, where you have A is the opposite of B. So, for example, our first proverb for today: "He who gathers in summer is a prudent son." Right. So this is the positive. Uh, you know, Summer is a time where it will be nice. It's hot. It can be muggy in the desert. In Israel, it can be very hot and dry. Not a pleasant time to work, right? So, of course, our natural inclination would be to do nothing. But someone who is wise knows you gather in the summer when it's easier. You can take off clothing. You can do a lot of things to help you manage heat. But when it comes to cold, there's not a lot you can do. You can put on more layers, but eventually it gets so cold, there is just no work to be done. And more importantly, when you're living in a primarily agrarian society, you even if you can go outside and do things, you can't grow food in the summer. I'm sorry, in the winter. Um, there just is a time for growing, and the winter is not it, right? So a prudent person plans ahead for their uh, for their summer, or sorry, for their winter by planting and reaping in summer, right? So verse 5, he who gathers in summer, or in other words, is in the process of farming and doing those things in summer, is a prudent son. But he who sleeps in harvest is a son who brings shame. In other words, we just got off this verse 4, talking about a slack hand. Remember that from last time? A slack hand causes poverty. Well, I think this is a more we're on a chain. We're going to find the proverbs don't aren't these proverbs the ones they're the proverbs of Solomon. These are you're very typically your wisdom sayings. They're going to go in chains, and so we're going to be on kind of this general theme of work, or the idea that work in the sense of supporting yourself and not being a burden on society, kind of thing. We're going to be on that for a little while, and the themes are connected. So you're on this work one, and then eventually we'll get to um, we go into verse 6, which is talking about um, how we go from how we work to how we speak, right? And then we go into wisdom, and then verse 9 looks like we're talking about our actions, right? So they're all centered around the idea of instructing a young man in wisdom sayings, or anyone in wisdom sayings, how they should live. Uh, Now, what I was hoping for today is I forgot I was going to go here. So, what is very common, there are long blocks of Proverbs where we get the first one, by verse, right? So these are two parts of one verse. I'll maybe illustrate that so it's a little more understandable. Okay, hopefully that's clearer now. Okay. So what you'll find often is that right here, you'll have like a word that'll close the sentence, and then it'll be the first word of the next sentence. And then so on and so forth. The last word here will be the first word of the next sentence. And what this allows a person to do is, the majority of folks, these wisdom sayings, they're important to have at the ready. They're important to memorize. So having those chains where you're going last word, first word, last word, first word, last word, first word, that does the same word, would allow you to memorize large blocks of the Proverbs, and be able to access them because of these connections of words, right? Unfortunately, I was kind of hoping to see that here, and it is not the case. We have, for example, let's just start with where we're at, verse 5. The last word here is the Hebrew root bosh, which is to be ashamed. Okay, so that's the end of verse 5. Then the first word of verse 6 is barakah. So obviously not the same word, and not following that trend. When I hopefully will find at some point a block of Proverbs that can illustrate this concept, where they're doing this so that people can memorize large portions. Anyway, that is some of the structure and poetry in the Hebrew Proverbs. Let's get into some of the content, shall we? Verse 5. He who gathers in summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who brings shame. We talked about this already a little bit. All I want to bring out is the second part of the sentence, the contradictory one, right? So a son who prepares in advance is one who brings honor to his family. One who sleeps in harvest, and I can't help but think about we don't have Jesus didn't give us a proverb about this specifically, but we have the fable, or the fairy tale of the if I remember correctly, the Aesop's fable, the grasshopper and the ant, which has everything to do with working while the time is right. Okay. I don't know if you've ever heard this parable, but basically it's exactly the story here. The grasshopper does nothing all summer long while the ant works very hard. The grasshopper is, eat, drink, and be merry. He's enjoying himself. And then eventually winter comes and the ant has food and the grasshopper doesn't. And, of course, then bad things happen. And it's to teach us a very simple lesson that when the time is right to prepare, we ought to prepare. So that we can be prepared when the times come, like winter or worse, right? So someone and there's no shame in widows, orphans needing food. There's no shame in people being down on their luck or suffering consequences. There's no shame in being a foreigner or a sojourner in the scriptures, right? So in other words, there is an issue of being unclean when you're a leper, but there's a difference between being clean and being sinful, right? Now, unfortunately, a lot of times the Jews conflated those two things to be the same thing, but we don't see, that's necessarily the case. There's a lot of things that have to be done to make someone clean, but like, for example, you might be a leper, and it might not necessarily be because you're sinful, right? So when it comes to being down on your luck in a variety of circumstances, it's not bad things happen, and God knows this, and He provides for people who bad things happen to, i.e., the processes of gleaning and reaping from the edges of the fields and the edges of fruit to provide for themselves. But God is saying that here, that when you have the ability to prepare, in other words, this son is not having things because he can't or because he has some infirmity or handicap. No, he's doing it because he's sleeping, he's resting, he's being lazy. Let's take a look at that word for "but he who sleeps in harvest." That might be very interesting. So the word here is radam. And the definition here, there's a bunch of, let's give all of them. They're kind of a primitive root to stun, to stupefy, To be fast asleep, be in a deep sleep, cast into a dead sleep. Okay. Um, yeah. Our specific one here, the Brown Driver Briggs gives it be or fall fast asleep. So, what the summer is a time where a person is supposed to be active and gathering for what is to come. And this person, instead of doing that, he's fast asleep, right? He's kind of dead to the world um, in the middle of the harvest, which brings up an interesting image, right? You think about it. Harvest will be a busy time. It'd be a frenetic time. There'd be lots of action. There'd be lots of noise. There'd be lots of people going out to the harvest field. So, in other words, the business and the activity of the harvest season. And I think harvest is important too, because we're not talking about, right? The first part of the verse says, "He who gathers in summer," right? Um, so we have it kind of has a connection to the summer fruit harvest, right? So they're saying summer because it's a specific time of year, but I think in reality, um, the both words are connected to harvest. It's just that they're in Israel there are different harvest times, right? So we have first the summer harvest time, and then we have this here. Let's look up the other harvest section. Harvest, process of harvesting, grain, specifically of grain. So the grain harvest and the fruit harvest would actually be different times during the year, right? But my guess is that the grain harvest was probably maybe more important than the fruit harvest, or at least um, was a time. I'm not getting any kind of connection to here when I'm looking at the meanings here of what time of year this was. It's just saying time of harvest, the wheat harvest, the barley harvest. Um, but from my limited understanding about Hebrew and Israel, those two harvests were at different times. Let's see if we can find out. Well, maybe there's a note here. Hold on, let's try that. 10:5. No, nothing here. So let's take a Israel fruit harvest, grain harvest. Okay. Yeah, that should probably help us. Okay, the harvest cycle and the holiday days. So spring holiday, which marks the beginning of the barley harvest. And then we have, let's see here, Shuvoth, wheat harvest begins. The weather stabilizes. Um, okay. I'm not seeing the difference in the fruit harvest and the wheat harvest here. There are different times of the year. That's what I'd like to know. Okay, here we go. This will be helpful. So the grapes were harvested in June and September. Figs are harvested in August and September. Pomegranates August and September. Olives September and November, kind of in the fruit category. Barley would be harvested in April. Wheat would be harvested in May. So I think this is helpful for our purposes then. So going back to our verse then, we have the first one is the wheat harvest. So he who gathers in summer, or who's gathering in wheat properly, right? Is a delight, is a wise son. He who sleeps in the harvest. Now this harvest is connected to the fruit harvest. Or no, it's not. Excuse me. Let's see here. Let's go back. So we got the first harvest is having to do with fruit. Okay. Well, that's interesting then. So, there's almost when we look at that more clear. So, verse 5, being clear, the first harvest word is bekayis. Okay, and bekayis has to do with the harvest of fruit, which we learned in our schedule is actually later in the year. It's June through September. Okay, now going back to the other one, this is a word used for the wheat harvest. Okay, which is earlier in the year. So we're looking at a son. Could we assume that since he's harvesting the fruit later in the year, that he's already harvested the wheat, whereas the unwise son, he doesn't harvest the wheat, which again earlier in the year we can probably counter him that if he's sleeping then, he's probably going to be sleeping later when the fruit's harvested. Or perhaps we're reading too deeply. Uh, you know, the second part, the unwise son, maybe the narrowing of the focus of harvest is wrong. Just a son who is actively harvesting when the harvest time is there is smart, as opposed to the son who is not who is sleeping and not harvesting. The wheat harvest would have been the primary food source, right? So this is really important. It's more important than the fruit harvest because this is your primary staple for life, making bread and whatnot. So more important. So the son who disregards this wheat harvest, he's a fool, right? Either way, I think that the very baseline reading would be this: there's a time to prepare. You ought to prepare when it's time to prepare, not sleep during those crucial times and then expect someone else to take care of you when you haven't prepared, right? Which would I be somewhat right in thinking this is just kind of how the world is working today, right? Uh, there's just this expectation that, and I'm not against having a social safety net, right? I think it is important because I've met people. I had a member of my congregation who had a degenerative neck, and this woman had done her very best to try to work, but all like 5 or 6 of her spinal column vertebrae were deteriorating. She had to fuse her entire neck, and it was just going to get worse as she got older. And she had tried very diligently to work her whole life. This is the kind of situation that the social security net was made for, and she should be taken care of, right? Um, she should be watched over. Because she's paid in her whole life, she's tried to work, and they made it rather difficult on her to get into that system. Whereas, other people kind of abuse it. Um, the expectation that if I make poor choices, whether it's student loans, career choice, whatever the case may be, that someone's going to bail me out, even though I have the ability to take care of my own problems, right? Leads to, I think, people making a lot of poor choice. Like, in other words, if you go into the game thinking that someone's always going to bail me out, there's no real danger. There's no real skin in the game. And so you make choices that are affected by that understanding. Whereas if you go in thinking to yourself, I'm predominantly, I need to take care of myself. I shouldn't impose my problems on other people. Now, the reality is that our parents and the people that love us, they want to care for us. But should we assume that from day one, right? Should we assume that people are going to? I'm not saying that when things get bad and when like we get sick or cancer comes or something, and we are in a terrible situation, the church is supposed to support us and help us. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, should we go into it thinking we can make any manner of bad choices and someone's going to bail me out, which is kind of what's going on here, right? If this guy had any sense of self-preservation, he would be harvesting during the harvest time as well. Rather, he thinks, maybe he thinks someone's just going to take care of me, someone's going to provide for me, so I'll just sleep and do whatever. Yeah, we probably belabored that to death. Let's go on. Verse 6. Berakot, Laros, Sadiq, Upi, Resayim, Yekaseh, Hamas. Hamas, that's fun, huh? Hamas is translated violence. You've heard that one before. I don't know if those two words are connected. I don't think they are. Because Hamas is an Arabic word. I'm not sure if they're etymologically connected. In other words, um, this could be a completely separate word from the Arabic word. Like they arose completely separate. They don't have any roots. It's just happenstance that they sound the same. That does happen. I don't know, but it's interesting. Okay. Barakot blessings. La Rose. I think it's Rosh here is just the word for head. So la is a prefix. So on the head. Zadik, righteous ones, right? Blessings are on the head of the righteous ones, right? Uh, Pei is the word for mouth, and then we have the vav, so we get up, which is but, and remember, a vav can be and or it can be but, right? It's a conjunction, it can be both. And when we see that the context of the two phrases are obviously contradictory, we would translate that vav as a but instead of an and, right? So in other words, the translation of the vav will depend on the context of the content of the two phrases, right? So, but the mouth of the wicked, Resaim, or I think it's Rasha is the word here, because im would be the suffix that gives us our gender and number. So yeah, no, Rasha, excuse me, wicked, criminal, evil man. Okay. So, but the mouth of evil ones covers over violence. Hamas. Let's look this word up and just get a sense of it. Hamas. Hamas. From Hamas. Okay. And let's see. Do we have any? Sometimes I'll throw in Arabic stuff and other languages as well, but I don't see anything here. So I don't think we should assume that these two things are connected. They probably aren't. Cruelty, damage, false, injustice, oppressor, unrighteous, violence against. A lot of word things. Malicious, violent. Okay. So going back to the verse then, but the mouth of the wicked covers violence. Now, covers, I'm guessing, is an idea of like paints it as something it isn't, covers over it, makes it not as bad, conceals it is one word here. Um, the people have great power to, as they are telling the truth or observing or reporting on things, just in general, reporting in the sense of like, I see something, then what do I say about it? Right? I've seen it with my own eyes. How do I then report that reality to other people? My words matter, and I can cover up and conceal the truth, or I can tell the truth. It seems like in this situation, the writer is saying wicked people, right? Their mouths don't tell the truth, but rather they conceal lies, they conceal violence, they conceal bad things. So, um, how does the ESV translate it? Blessings are on the head of the righteous, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. Yeah, it's pretty much that is pretty much word for word what it is in the Hebrew. Verse 7, the memory, uh, Zaker, Zadik, Libraka, Vesem, Resaim, Yirkab. Zaker, the memory of the righteous is blessed, but the name of the wicked will rot. Uh, yeah, I think this is true. Um, I'll give you an example just so we can kind of grab a hold of it with a modern day example. You know, now I'm forgetting his name. Billy Graham, he would we find out so he's a man who is righteous, right? And then as people report on his life, they tell us little nuggets and tidbits. So we find out that more and more respect him more and more, right? So he would have someone go up, a trusted advisor go up and check his room. Whenever he went on a trip, he would have someone go up and completely give his room a once over to make sure that no one was there and that everyone would know that no one was there, i.e., someone other than his wife. Okay, so that everyone could be very, very clear. And I don't think he did this because he wanted to feel better than, but he took the idea of above reproach in First Timothy as very important, right? So these things come out about someone who is righteous. Now, of course, before God, no one is righteous. Billy Graham was still a sinner. He needed forgiveness from Christ, but he was a man who, I think righteous in this sense is someone who loves the Lord and tries as best they can to follow the Lord's commands. The opposite is of a fool, right? As as the wicked ones. Now we have here um, a combination of the same word from above. The mouth of the wicked covers violence. What's the same word here? Ra'ah or Rasha. So again, wicked. So this idea is that the wicked, their names will rot. And I think what that means is that over time, if someone is wicked, these things come out. You know, I think especially about like politicians. As time goes on, we find out more and more things that maybe aren't as good as we'd like to know about them, and their reputations kind of what's the word for silver? They tarnish over time. You know, great example of this. Not trying to be political or picking on people, but like Bill Clinton had his fair. I mean, in office, I remember when I was a kid and he was in office, fairly well respected. And then as time went on, we just found out more and more about him, and his reputation became tarnished. So, you know, uh, I'm just saying that in life, um, if you think that you can create an image that's false and it's going to stand, it won't. Either you're going to actually walk righteously and create an image that way, or you're going to create a false image that's going to be torn down eventually. I mean, even, like, even amongst, I'm thinking about this in the context of like the Egyptian, how the Egyptian pharaohs and really any political leader would deal with when they conquered the previous pharaoh. They would, I remember there was a female pharaoh and she depicted herself in statues as having like male features, like she had that typical pharaoh beard, and it's rumored that she killed her predecessor, right? Well, then I think a nephew of hers ended up being the pharaoh eventually, and he ended up killing her. So he goes about breaking down every representation of her face or her rule. They literally go throughout the land where there were carvings referring to her name, and they would take it out. So they, every once in a while, I think they found a bust of her or a carving of her. It was a really big archaeological find because the pharaoh went to such an effort to destroy all of them, so there'd be no memory of her. Right? Um, she climbs the throne in a deceitful way. She poses as something she is not. There's lots of, in other words, there's lots of negative things here. Eventually, her image, reputation, was rots from the inside out, and it falls down. Right. So, in other words, if you would like your reputation, your memory to persist, which, by the way, even for very wonderful, righteous men, won't. I mean, we have basic problems with our children in school right now, knowing who are the Axis and Ally powers in World War II. Uh, like the contents of the Holocaust and the leaders of the Axis versus the Allies. I mean, things like this. So some of the most important people, because of circumstance, right? I mean, they became important because of the times they lived in. I don't necessarily know if they would be as important in other times. Like Churchill was a great guy. Would he have been as important as he was, if he lived in the 1970s? I don't know. Maybe. But the point being is that these were some of the greatest people that lived because of the times they lived in, and even they're being forgotten about, right? So we shouldn't really hang our hat on being remembered because time has a really great way of wiping out memory of anybody. But uh, if you want to be remembered, let's say that's something that you desire. It seems to me that the Proverbs is holding out the idea that being a righteous person will have much better chances of you being remembered than being a wicked person and trying to create an image of yourself. Um, so, and there is this whole chestnut of God talking about the book of life, and that your name is written in the book of life. So, being a righteous person and loving the Lord, and you know, uh, being remembered, perhaps would be a lot easier and more successful if the one remembering you isn't subject to the ravages of time, i.e., God remembers you and he does not change, as it says in Malachi. So perhaps we ought to put our efforts into not necessarily being remembered by the world or being remembered by the planet or the edifices and the structures. Perhaps we ought to put our effort to be remembered by God, i.e., trusting in Him and loving His Son. Right. Um, anyway, verse 8. Hakam lev yakach misvot ve'avil petayim yilabet. Okay, so Hakam, we've had the Chokhmah, wisdom. So Hakam would be kind of the uh, an adjective that connects to heart. So like wise hearts or the wise in heart, right? Wise hearts is kind of actually, I like that a little more. Wise hearts will receive commands. And I think the will receive here, let's see, it's call, imperfect, third mass and singular. So I think this is like, yeah, the lakak is to take, receive, makes sense, right? But I think it's received in the sense of I'll I'll take it in. And I think in this sense, when it comes to commandments, you're not like physically receiving a commandment and grabbing onto it, but rather it's a mental assertion or assent to, right? I agree these things are true. I assent to them, and these are yes, I agree. I will do them, right? So the wise in heart receives mizmot, commands of God, right? Learning, teaching. Um, comes from tsava, which is what? Give charge, lay charge, commands, orders. It's just, um, in other words, God gives teachings. He gives these commands. He gives these laws. He lays down boundaries on how we are to live. And a smart person receives them. right? A fool rejects them, kicks against them, rebels against them, and wants to follow their own commands, right? So the wise receive commands. A fool, we have another vav, and of course, since the two phrases are contradictory, we're going to make that vav a but. But a fool, let's look up this word. It is pronounced evil. No way, that can't be right. Avil, Avil, probably more proper. Comes from, where does this word come from? Foolish man. It's not used a lot. Looks like there's only about 10 or 12 references here. Avil. A foolish man will fall, yila bet, to thrust down, out, or away. Okay, it comes from Labat. Labat, to thrust down, to fall, to, okay, so, but a fool, let me have this word, lip, speech, edge, brim, gossip, lip service. Huh. The ESV has been translated, the wise of heart will receive commandments, but a babbling fool will come to ruin. So the fool we already had, and then I guess we're saying this idea of my little program here is translating it prating, like prattling on kind of idea. So but will fall or will fall apart, and then they're going to come to ruin here. But a prattling fool. I wonder if verse 8 isn't talking about this idea of listening versus speaking. A wise person listens, receiving instruction, whereas a foolish person just runs their mouth all the time. They're prattling, they're babbling, right? And they fall apart. Very true. It's better. I was just actually reading a little story about Coriolanus. Let's see if I can get this translated right or spoken right. So Coriolanus, and it's a really interesting story. So this guy apparently he gives he's a Roman figure, right? And he's a former soldier, and he wants to give his first speech. So what he does is he just shows all the scars from his war service, and everyone wants to elect him. They think he's good, and then he starts talking, and he has a disdain for poor and the plebes, and he sides with all the rich in Rome, and so like at the beginning when he says almost nothing, everyone loves him. They want to elect him, and then when he starts opening his mouth and talking, by the end of it, he's banned from Rome. They kick him out of the city. So, how does it go? It's another proverb. How does that go? Let's see here. Better to it's a I'm sorry, it's an Abraham Lincoln quote. Better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. And I think that actually that is actually a paraphrase of a proverb. Yeah, Proverbs 17:28. Let's take a look at that real quick. It's not too far away from where we're at. Okay. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. So yeah. And then I think there's another place too where it kind of gets to the other aspect of this idea of being foolish and speaking more than you listen, and like making it clear you're kind of an idiot by talking too much, right? So yeah, we have this proverb here. The fool prattles on, babbles on, and they fall apart, right? But a wise person receives the commands of God and lives by them. In other words, maybe a wise person, we could also, maybe let's say also, a wise person listens more than they talk. It's a hard thing. I want to follow this rule as a pastor. I would like to listen more than I talk, but I'm kind of paid to talk. Sometimes I feel like I talk too much. I talk because I have to. Um, Maybe I got to work on that. Okay, let's do. I think I was going to go through 9 today, so let's at least finish the Proverbs section. We probably won't get to Corinthians today. Holek, Batom, Yelek, Betah, Uma Aka, Uma. I'm sorry, Uma Akes, Deraka, Yivadea. So we have Yada, which is a really to become known to. It's a really common word in the Old Testament, especially in the Pentateuch. Yada. Every time like it talks about, like Isaac knew his wife, it's always Yada, right? So it's used more often than you'd think. Um, he who walks with integrity walks securely. Okay, so let's just look up halak here. What exactly this is? This is from halak. Oh, of course, to come, to go. Halak is used for walk occasionally, but usually it's more used for like when someone's coming or going. It's kind of like it is that come and go kind of word in Hebrew, right? But it also does use for walk, but it's like kind of like not necessarily. I don't know if it's necessarily like actual walking, but just kind of your path, your walk in life, right? You do that with integrity, and you'll be secure. Um, I think this probably works itself out in one of two ways. Worldly, I think we can find that if you're living by the laws of the land and you're a person of integrity, usually you're going to be okay. Now, it's not always the case. You can be in places like North Korea, you can be in places like China, um, where it doesn't matter if you do the right thing. If you get on the wrong side of somebody, you're going to be in trouble, right? Or African nations, places of persecution happens, you know, even here in the United States, right? Always doing the right thing and being a good person doesn't always pay dividends in the real world. That's just reality. We have to be okay with that, because there's a second part that the most important thing is your righteousness before God, following, loving the Lord, trusting in Him for forgiveness and salvation, and living according to His matzot, His commands. Right? Did I do that right? That I said, yeah, mizmot, yeah, His commands. So you can walk securely. You can feel confident in what you're doing. But right, he who perverts his ways. Now, his ways would be God's ways. Right? Who perverts God's ways will become known. Huh. That's interesting. I don't know how does the ESV translate? Whoever walks in trade walks securely, but he who makes his ways crooked will be found out. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Right. Um, he who perverts. Okay. Okay, so I'm probably wrong here because I said his ways will be God's ways. But actually, the ESV is going a different route here and saying, kind of like, in other words, but he who perverts his own ways. That's why it's getting makes his ways crooked, or perverts his own ways, will become known. So someone who has perverted his own life in terms of like there is a maybe accepted like this is how we follow God's law, and someone who has perverted his life, so obviously he's not doing that, right? That person will be found out eventually. I think it actually very much connects to back to verse 7, right? The name of the wicked will rot, right? So then we have this, his ways will be found out, well, even if he doesn't want them to be. And this is true in life, right? We think we can hide certain things from God and from even from man. It's not going to work. You're going to be found out, right? Secrets have. That's why I always think it's kind of funny when people talk about conspiracy theories of the government and stuff. Like secrets get out. People love telling secrets. It's hard to keep secrets, you know. So I always kind of if there's some kind of grand conspiracy, I'll probably attribute it more towards government um, lethargy, government apathy, or government stupidity than I will attribute it to a grand conspiracy because conspiracies are hard to keep secret. I think we kind of want to believe that people are really devious and really smart, but on the whole, most of the time people are just kind of dumb, myself included. So that'll close us up for today. We're just going to look at Proverbs then. Good set of Proverbs, lots of interesting ideas to cover. So Lord be with you on the rest of your Monday. God's blessings, and may you have a wonderful week this week. God's peace.